Welcome to the Humankindness at Work podcast, where you'll hear inspiring stories of people just like you making a difference in their corner of the world. You'll hear how human kindness is at work and how you can be a part of it. I'm Jennifer Clark. Ready to be inspired? Here we go. What happens when the idea of loving our neighbor moves from offering a polite smile to caring for the vulnerable on a global scale? What happens when we stop talking, thinking, and dreaming about making a difference and actually go out and do it? My guest today is spearheading human kindness at work all around the globe. Jody Luke is the president of Love Does, a nonprofit founded by Bob Goff over 20 years ago that fights for human rights, cares for the vulnerable, and provides education in conflict zones around the world. Under Jody's leadership, the organization has expanded internationally to 15 countries, while also broadening its reach domestically to further help refugees, teen moms, and the incarcerated. From a major accounting firm to a variety of startup businesses, Jody has a diverse financial background with companies of all sizes. Jody may have a firm grasp on the numbers, but it's the life stories of people around her that fuel her desire to help friends and strangers alike. Jody strives to bring bundles of purpose and passion to everything she does. Just ask her biggest fans, her family. She's been married for more than 20 years and has 3 kids who can all attest to her many world record-setting attempts at multitasking. Welcome to the podcast, Jody Luke.
Aw, thanks so much. It's an honor to be here. Really, it is.
I'm really glad that you're here today. I have been a fan of Love Does for a long time, so it's an honor to have you and to hear your story.
Aw.
And I think I'm giving you a run for your money on the setting the world record on multitasking. I think I have like 700 mental tabs open at all times.
Occasionally, I'll just add them to the to-do list, stuff I've already done that morning, and cross it off.
Nice. Yes.
It feels good to have some momentum going into the day.
Absolutely. Like, wake up, check.
And brush your teeth. It's going to be a great day.
I love that. Well, we're going to jump in. So for people who are not familiar with Love Does, can you tell us how Love Does began? And in that, can you unpack the meaning behind the organization?
Well, as you mentioned, Love Does was founded by Bob Goff, who is the author of Love Does. It's an international bestseller, and he wrote that decades ago now. It's been translated into, I think, 25 different languages. And then the nonprofit actually predated the book, and so he really had this novel idea. And it's not an original idea, actually. If faith guides your steps, for some it does. For me, it does. Just to love our neighbor really well. And we don't just think about doing good things, that we don't plan for it, but we actually do it. And so we take that next courageous step to show up. And sometimes we show up in really hard places. In fact, as you mentioned, Love Does is expanded into 15 countries, and many of those countries are in conflict or post-conflict zones, some really difficult places. But we are committed to showing up, continuing to show up with resilience and with love. And then we have found that education is one of the biggest opportunities for change, especially in some of these environments. And then we inject wonder and whimsy and joy into everything that we're doing, not because it's frivolous, but we found that it's really healing. And so we work in places like Afghanistan and Uganda, in Israel and in Jordan, in Nepal and Dominican Republic, Somalia, just a whole variety of places. And then domestically, as you mentioned, we've expanded. We have a single mom home in San Diego, and we visit a prison up in Northern California. We're headquartered in San Diego, but we travel every other month up to a prison, and we've seen some of the most remarkable opportunities for redemption and change that I've ever experienced in any place. It's a really dark place, and yet you find that sometimes when you show up in love or creating spaces to just care for your neighbor, it's a really powerful thing. And then, of course, this confetti and balloons, that Bob was so famous for within Love Does, and that we have put into everything that we're doing. It just makes what is a really remarkable opportunity for me to be involved in all of these countries and places really fun too.
Now, this sounds like a huge impact, and it is. It's a full-blown organization making an intentional difference in the world. But this movement started with Bob Goff's desire to simply love the people around him.
Sometimes the power is just in showing up. Bob showed up in northern Uganda and, right after the Lord's Resistance Army, which was a brutal civil war where kids were abducted as child soldiers, just horrific things happened. And he decided to say, let's start a school here. And as he says, 9 kids showed up at the beginning. I don't think he could have dreamed. Now we have a primary and we have a secondary school that boards 2,000. It's actually fully sustainable. Not many people can say that an education or that a school is fully sustainable, meaning that if Love Does were to go away based on their school fees, it will continue on in perpetuity. And so now we're building a university right next door. We see it as one of those once-in-a-generation opportunities to perhaps change an entire country, that we're not just educating kids, but we're educating future leaders, doctors, maybe presidents of the country, who knows? But it's amazing what happens when somebody can dream and then they put action to it and show up. And that's what we've seen over really decades of being in these places.
Love Does works in some of the most complex and vulnerable areas of the world, like Afghanistan, Ukraine, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In environments that are shaped by conflict and injustice, kindness shows up as a real, practical force in their work.
Well, I mentioned that we have 20 plus schools, so we have found education to be a real difference maker in a lot of these places. So you mentioned Afghanistan. We have a school in Afghanistan. When the Taliban took over, we had to close the school. We were able to reopen it 3 months later, which is quite remarkable. And we worked with some tremendous leaders on the ground, and we had to separate boys and girls. But we ended up putting a computer lab in this school. And I think it shows up sometimes in teachers. I love teachers. I love it because they're not often just teaching math and writing and English, but they're teaching character and perseverance and resilience and injecting hope into the classroom. And I was able to Zoom with our school maybe, I don't know, a few months ago. It was at 9 or 10 p.m. at night for me. It's quite remarkable, really, this Zoom thing. I'm Zooming into Afghanistan in today's world. How wild is that? And I ended up talking to a girl. She spoke perfect English. And I said, what do you hope for? And she said, I don't know, but I just know that I have hope when the doors of this school continue to open for me. And it is a complex situation. Her future is uncertain. But I know that for today, she has hope because her teacher showed up. Her students, her fellow classmates showed up for her. And, you never know what it's going to look like. Different generations, it changes. And sometimes it doesn't take millions of people. Sometimes it takes only a few really charismatic, principled leaders to affect great change. And so that's what we're hoping for in some of these schools and some of these really difficult places to work.
Sometimes it's easy to look at someone like Jody and think, well, of course they're making a huge impact. But Jody knows it's the very ordinary things about us that can be used for big things.
I'm always amazed that God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. I feel like that. I feel very ordinary. I'm a mom with 3 kids. How do I get to do this? And it really speaks a lot of times to calling. My background was in finance. I worked at Pricewaterhouse. I started a fractional CFO firm, and Bob called me 17 years ago, and said, would I help with this beginning nonprofit? And then took it over from a leadership perspective about 4 or 5 years ago to really grow and expand it. And, when he called, it was one of those moments that we all have where that the hair on your arm kind of stands up. And even though I had young kids at the time, it was this marriage of my skill set and my calling. And I knew that there was something special there. I think Frederick Buechner calls it the calling is where your deep gladness meets the world's deepest need. And I didn't quite know that that's really what was happening, but that's how I would describe it now.
Jody and her team at Love Does work intentionally with everyday leaders all over the world who want to be part of making a difference in their own communities.
I get a front row seat to ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things because they just said, yes, I will show up. And one of those leaders I think of, like I mentioned earlier, was one of those 9 students that showed up at that school right after the Lord's Resistance Army left northern Uganda. And he was sleeping under a truck, and he was an orphan from the war. He showed up at the school. We ended up educating him. We have college scholarships. He ended up receiving one of those. He got his degree in engineering, and he has come back. And as we've built this primary school and expanded the secondary school, he's built, I think, 45 different buildings, standalone structures for us on the campus. And so for him, he now has a family. He's a leader in his own right and is an engineer because he ended up, can you imagine how scary that would be? You're living under a truck. You are an orphan from war, and you are going to say, what? Like, do I just do nothing, or do I stumble into this classroom? And then you encounter some really loving, remarkable teachers, and then look at the trajectory of his life. And so, he's an engineer. I could duplicate that in all of the countries with some of the leaders or country directors that we get to work with. Absolutely outstanding.
His entire life is different because of Love Does. And now the ripple effect of all the people that he is affecting through his work and his leadership. I love that. I love that. That's how it's supposed to work, right? That's how love works.
Love does work like that. And I think love is also about second chances. No one is perfect. We all need a lot of grace in our lives, especially now, right? When we look around, and it just seems like sometimes it can be really dark.
Love Does isn't afraid to enter that darkness, whether it be a war-torn country or a local prison. Jody's regular visits to those incarcerated have opened her eyes to the ripple effect of human kindness.
I was just at a graduation for a class last Friday where we were graduating 60 people from ASL class. And if you go back in time 6 years, Bob teaches a Dream Big class within San Quentin, and Love Does helps to coordinate that. And then we offer educational scholarships because of the 3 million incarcerated people, those that receive a scholarship and actually achieve their bachelor's or their master's in prison, there's less than a 1% recidivism rate. It's quite remarkable.
Wow.
So we're in this class. It's a Dream Big class, and the power of dreaming is absolutely incredible. Envisioning a life that you're not currently living is a really courageous, powerful step. And it allows you a path forward to kind of move in a direction. And so we always ask our students, what do you dream for? What are you dreaming about? And one of the guys said, well, my big dream is really to get out of prison. And I don't know that that's going to happen. He was in for life. And then he recalled his brother was deaf, and he recognized how difficult that is. And that's just only intensified for those that are incarcerated and deaf in prison. And he sees them on the yard, and they often get in trouble because they can only communicate when there's a state-sponsored interpreter. And so he said, what if I ended up getting certified in sign language, which he did. And then he said, what if I actually teach a class? And he has. And now there's, I think, over 300 different students, including tens and 20s of guards. And the ripple effect has been remarkable. Not only is the the deaf community often underserved, but I can tell you the deaf incarcerated community is woefully underserved. And the ripple effect of what that has done for that population, seeing that they are seen and heard, and now kind of can envision a future that's different, and maybe there's some restoration and redemption to their stories. It's quite remarkable. So we were up for a graduation. I had to laugh because I ended up surprising him with a Love Does Award, which is just a recognition of those that have done extraordinary service and loving others and doing stuff. But it's a glass award and it's really sharp. And so we had given it to his wife prior to going into the prison. He is now paroled. But we walked into the prison, and then unbeknownst to me, his wife had talked to the warden and said, could we please try to get this award in the prison so they can give it to him at this graduation ceremony? Ended up that they did. And so I was on stage giving him this award, but quite frankly, it's a weapon. And so halfway through my speech, I started to get real nervous, and I was like, oh my gosh, what could happen? And so I actually said it on stage. I was like, this is a weapon. Oh my gosh, I should not say that. I like reel it back, but backtrack. But I kept it real close to my heart. But it was a really special moment because, to your point, it recognized that this one leader made that courageous next step, and this is in prison, a really dark place, to love a community, to love their neighbor, and the ripple effect has been nothing less than breathtaking.
Jody, what have you learned about the relationship between dignity and kindness when serving vulnerable communities?
None of those concepts ever go out of style, right? The world may change, but dignity and kindness, love and hope, they always remain. And I think I have found that the resilience and continuing to show up in tough places makes the biggest difference. In the Congo, we built a school, and then the next year a volcano went off and it actually destroyed the school. Imagine that. So you have a choice at that point. What do you do? You've poured these resources into it. And so we did what only love does. And that's, we built the school again. And now we're working on figuring out how to put a playground, a colorful playground, right next to the school. So I'm not only going to show up, but I'm going to show up again, and I'm going to show up now with even more love, with more dignity, with more kindness, even in the face of those challenges and hurdles, because those kids need it. Those kids are in trauma, and those kids need stable presence in their lives. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but truly, we really do, in these places, we bring confetti, we bring balloons, we bring laughter, we play games, not because we're wasting time, but because we see it as central to really loving kids or people in vulnerable situations. And so I think that kindness extends to that dignity right there.
Making a difference on a global scale takes money. And you have helped steward donor trust for many years. How does kindness factor into the way Love Does thinks about transparency and stewardship and honoring the generosity of others?
It is a worldwide family of friends. This does not just happen with one person. So whenever we start a school, there's hundreds of people that are behind it. We do these Love Does and action clubs on college campuses where in the fall we give a certain amount of resources to college students to figure out how to love their neighbors and communities well. And then in the summer we do a pickleball for a purpose where they raise money now towards the university. So it's university students in the U.S. raising money for university students in northern Uganda. And I love that parallel. But to your point, my background is in finance. And so it matters. Money matters, and stewarding the donor dollars well matters, because it's the difference between having another school or not. Kindness in the middle of that generosity. I am always aware that each person who has chosen to give and be generous has a story themselves. And so part of the way that we go about our trips, or whenever we have groups of people that have said, yes, I'm on board with supporting Love Does, is, hey, how do we support and cheer them on as well? There's, I know just recently we had a friend who got engaged. It doesn't take that much to make a little certificate and have a surprise. In fact, she joined us in prison for a visit, and we had all of the incarcerated guys and all of us do a really special ceremony with a certificate. And, I'm just cheering her on in this new season. And so it's as much fun for us to be creative in how we love kids and vulnerable populations around the world as it is to see how we love our donors and the community around us that has made all of this possible, because we couldn't do it without them.
Sometimes when we're in the middle of making a difference, we don't actually know it. This was true for Bob Goff when he worked as an attorney and wrote the book Love Does in 2012.
So Bob was an attorney. And again, just like all of us, we're just, we're living our lives, but we have this calling on our lives. We feel like to do more. And half the battle is you just don't know. If you knew what to do, you'd do it. And that's sometimes some of the biggest challenges. So Bob had a number of just interesting encounters in his life and ended up writing a book about it. But when he wrote the book, I don't know that he had, again, the foresight to think that it was going to be almost this worldwide movement later on. Thankfully so, or who knows, if you had that thought, it would just be overwhelming. Right. And so he talked to the publisher, and I don't know that he thought that a lot would come out of it, but he said, with the profits from this book, Love Does, I want all of the royalties to go towards building a school. And that was that school that was in Uganda. That was that school that the engineer, that was that student under the truck that went to. And so all of the royalties, even to this day, they go to support all of the work with Love Does. And so it's a pretty cool story. It's a pretty cool ripple effect, like you said earlier.
When I think about making a difference in the world on the scale that Love Does has been operating on for the past 2 decades, it makes me wonder, what does sustainable kindness look like? Especially when the work is long and hard and emotionally demanding. How do you sustain that kind of kindness?
I think you said it earlier, where generosity breeds generosity, kindness brings more kindness. I love that we get to be in the places that we get to be, where I see students in northern Uganda have an opportunity for education that will shape an entire country, or Ukrainian refugees in Warsaw that get to try to rebuild their lives when it was interrupted by war, or men that we're talking about in San Quentin, they have an opportunity for a second chance. And when you're in those places, you just want to be in those places more. You can't help but want to do that. We have a school in Tijuana, and the largest refugee camp in the Americas. And when you're at that school, to give opportunity and hope to kids who have really never encountered that, how can I not want to do that more and more and more? And, the other part of it is I'm not doing that by myself. I have a tremendous team. I have a team that's like-minded, that cares as much as I do, if not more. And I think together we're saying, what else can we do? Let's be creative and fun and go after this with everything that we have, because we recognize that it's a gift that we get to be in these places and spaces and bring as many people along with us as possible.
Not everyone is going to start a nonprofit making a difference on a global scale. If you're feeling overwhelmed by the needs around you and want to make a difference somehow, Jody has something to say about the role of small, faithful acts of kindness.
It can change the world. It really can. We got on this podcast and I brought my dog over to my neighbor because we've had 15 years of engaging with the most beautiful neighbors that you could ever imagine. They're in their 80s and could never have kids, and have adopted my kids as their own, because when we first moved in the first week, my then 5-year-old went over with a a note and a card and just said, "We love you," just as 5-year-olds
Oh,
do. And it ended up turning into a weekly appointment to garden and bake together for her life. And she is now
wow.
17, and she would count my 80-year-old
Yeah,
neighbor, Donna, as one of her best friends. We didn't have to
yeah,
go to Uganda to do that. We just had to literally go 20 steps to the left. And uh, I think we see that all over the place in our own neighborhood. We see it in our city. I go back to those Love Does in Action clubs. If there's college students that want to start one on their campus, reach out. I know Duke just did one this fall, and I think we're going to replicate it next year, where the resources that we give in the fall, we are asking those college students, hey, how can you love and be creative and serve the support staff at your university?
mm,
And they did some fun event or packages for, I think, the bus drivers and the cleaning crew at Duke University. How cool.
yeah,
Again, you didn't have to get on a plane to do that. You just had to be aware,
yeah,
and you had to show up for your fellow neighbor and coworker and colleague. And
yeah.
so it doesn't take, honestly, all that much. But what's wild is that you start doing that stuff, and then you are aware of more and more opportunities. I
Mhm.
think um, God also always puts our biggest dreams in the quiet hopes of our hearts. And so we
Mm.
just have to be listening. We have to be listening for those dreams. We have to be watchful for those opportunities because they're out there.
What kind of legacy do you hope Love Does continues to build?
I think the only legacy that I would love to continue to see is that we just love others in the most creative, powerful, consistent way. Like I said, it's never going to go out of style. Love has been around from the very beginning, and it'll outlast us all. And so we can lean into all of the negative stuff that we see in the world, or we can lean into the other. And it's a choice, often that's made every day with on our calendars at the time that we've spent, the discipline with our phones to either doomsday scroll or to put it down and walk over to our neighbor's house. And if we can be a part of encouraging others to do that and providing opportunities for people to get involved, and hopefully it outlasts us. Hopefully I'm the interim president, right? And that I get to pass this on to the next president and the next and the next and the next. And we have these schools that outlast us because they are sustainable, or universities that are built and that are educating kids in the same way. What a cool legacy. I couldn't think of anything better.
Bob Goff says that some of our neighbors are across the ocean, some are across the street, and we have the responsibility to love all of them. But all of our good intentions won't actually bring change. We have to act. Love does. So today, how will you love your neighbors? If you're interested in learning more about Love Does, supporting them financially, or purchasing Bob Goff's book, Love Does, whose profits go directly to supporting the university in Uganda, check out the links in the show notes. This episode is sponsored by my voiceover business, Jennifer's Voice. If you're looking for professional voiceover to bring the sound of human kindness into your next media project, I'd love to chat about your needs. You can visit jennifersvoice.com to hear samples of my work and get in touch. Until next time, let's put human kindness to work and love our neighbors well. See you next time.